It wasn't completely dark in the room, but the curtains were closed, and I only had one lamp burning. I suppose I could have watched TV or had a drink, but I just didn't feel like it. I showered and shaved, then put on my most comfortable clothes. It was going to be a long night, and I wanted to be prepared. It was important for me to stay sober, even if I wanted to drink myself to death. I had had a pretty busy day, and I was dead tired. Sitting on the couch, I tried to figure out where I had gone wrong, but then I decided I hadn't. She had cheated, and it was her fault, not mine. However, I would have to pay for it. No matter what happened, the deed was done. 12 years of marriage gone. Fortunately, there were no children in her first pregnancy 3 years ago. Natalie had suffered an unfortunate miscarriage, ending any chance of a family. We were both upset by the tragedy, but I never imagined it would end with her having an affair. I kept checking my watch. Who would come first? Would it be my cheating wife, or someone from one of the many agencies responsible for the peace and tranquility of D.C.? It could be the FBI, the CIA, the local or state police, or even Homeland Security. A cold beer would be just as welcome right now. The farmhouse in Warrenton was far enough out of town that I didn't have to worry about political crap. A year after her miscarriage, Natalie got a job as an advertising agent for a political lobbying firm, and she had to drive out of town every day. She complained a little about it, but the excitement of the job made up for any inconvenience. At first, Natalie was excited about her new job and enjoyed telling me about all the interesting people she interacted with during the workday. I always listened and paid attention. At some point during her second year on the job, I noticed that she had one acquaintance that she talked to regularly, but never mentioned. This was someone we both knew and were actually friends with. The fact that she avoided any conversation about him was disturbing. Malcolm Eugene Hurd was one of the senators from our home state of Indiana. Natalie and I attended Indiana University with Malcolm and his wife, Sonia. As Malcolm rose in the political arena, we grew distant from each other, but we still exchanged Christmas cards. Natalie's company was responsible for Malcolm's campaign ads and for contacting voters back home. Over the past year, I had seen several pictures of the senator in newspapers and magazines with Natalie visible in the background. There were several short TV spots where he was meeting with people, and she was standing next to him and smiling. Under those circumstances, she would have been invisible to most people, but not to me. She never once mentioned seeing Malcolm or talking to him. I, of course, felt that this was unusual. I worked from home and was rarely in D.C. I had a small but successful business managing company retirement accounts with less than 100 employees. Most of my competitors tended to focus on larger clients, so I had an open field. I wasn't making a lot of money, but I was comfortable and enjoyed the work, especially since I could run all my business from home without an office staff. It was easy to get paranoid about the whole situation. It was harder to see if something was really happening or if it was my imagination. A private investigator was out of the question. There was no way I could afford to hire someone to ferret out everything about a U.S. senator. In desperation, when I bought 3 small handheld GPS units, they ran on battery power for 11 hours and recorded all the places Natalie traveled during the workday. Mostly, she drove on and around the Beltway until she hit Alexandria. There was no way I could use these devices to keep track of her. But I didn't feel like doing that in D.C. traffic anyway. I figured I could use one of them every day for 3 days, and then follow her on the breadcrumbs on the weekend. If she was cheating, maybe something would turn up. Sure enough, the GPS units worked much better than I had anticipated in the first 3 days. I used them. She stayed twice at the executive suite near Reston. I had no trouble ascertaining that room 214 was rented by U.S. Senator Malcolm Hurd. I didn't know how long she had been staying there, but it didn't matter. I suppose I could have told her my new information and given her the opportunity to give me an explanation, but I never did. For the next few days, I left the house after Natalie and drove to Reston. I found a quiet place away from prying eyes and made myself comfortable. On the second day, Malcolm arrived in a big black Mercedes. Natalie showed up 10 minutes later. It was over 2 hours before they got out and drove off separately. My marriage was over. It was time for planning. 3 different companies made offers to buy my small business. I quietly put the money into a long-term offshore account. The mortgage on the house was more than the current appraisal, and I figured I could walk away from it. Everything else didn't matter. They met twice on Tuesday, and I used that as a planning point. Monday, I spent all day printing letters and address labels. By 4 o'clock, over 200 stamped envelopes were ready the next day, which also happened to be today. Everything went according to plan. First, I attached a bright orange smoke bomb to Malcolm's ignition switch and then carefully trimmed all of Natalie's valve stems. Malcolm's car wouldn't be destroyed, but it would become unusable until it was cleaned before returning home. I mailed all the envelopes. Phase 1 was complete. Natalie arrived home ahead of all the federal agents I expected. Upon entering the room, she took off her coat. Her purse dropped with a clatter onto the side table. I noticed a slight glance, but she said nothing. Finally, she sat down directly across from me. Inside. I had to ask one of the girls from work to give me a ride home. I didn't say or do anything. That was a pretty drastic thing to do. Robert. How did she know it was me? It could have been a vandal or someone with political grievances. I didn't say anything back. You could have said something. Why did you do it? Why didn't Malcolm give you a ride home? You know exactly why we had to have both cars towed. I'm sorry if I inconvenienced you. There were police and reporters there. 2 television camera crews came by. I know. I called them. You son of a jerk. That was horrible and inconsiderate. Malcolm is up for re-election. If they find out what really happened, it will destroy his chances. I hope so. She seemed to be trying not to cry. It wasn't working. Natalie, what was I supposed to do? You cheated on me with someone I considered a friend. Does Sonia know what's going on? No, of course she doesn't. I hope she still doesn't know. They have 3 children, Robert. Do you have any idea what this will do to their family? It's nothing. Things are going to get much worse in the next few days. How can they get worse? Nothing could be worse than this. Well, for starters, the police will be coming for me soon. Why? Neither Malcolm nor I ever mentioned your name. How did he explain it to the authorities? He just said it was someone who disagreed with his political views. Well, that ruined my plan before it even began. I expected to be dragged into some interrogation center and worked over. Robert, do you want to talk about this? Do I get a chance to explain what happened? No. I stood up and made my way to the kitchen. If the police weren't coming, I was going to have a beer. Natalie, I don't want to know what you did, why you did it, or when you did it. It doesn't matter. You can move out, or you can stay. I just don't care. But please don't even try to justify yourself. I stepped out onto the porch. It was cool. For this time of year. The beer was good, but coffee would have been better. I didn't have a reconciliation plan, and I had no idea why she acted the way she did. Nor did I want to know. When I got back to the house, Natalie had already gone into the bedroom and closed the door. I grabbed another beer and sat down on the couch again. It was going to be a long night. About an hour later, my wife came back into the living room. It was obvious that she had been crying. She carefully sat down in the chair closest to me and began kneading her hands. Robert, what did you mean when you said the situation would get worse? I sent a letter to Sonia today. I also sent out 221 copies of the letter to every newspaper, radio station, and television station in the county. Every member of the U.S. Senate got a copy, as well as the FBI, CIA, NSA, and Homeland Security. Every member of our families received one copy, as well as all the names on our Christmas card list. Every commentator on Fox television received their own letter. Your boss and everyone you work with got one letter too. God, no. What kind of letter? Who do you think is going to believe the accusations of a madman? Do you really have hard evidence that something was going on? Or are you still guessing? You're going to look like a fool, Robert. Worse than that, they'll call me feeble-minded and crazy. Do you think I care about that? I have no life and nothing to hope for. I'm going down, but I'm not going alone. I think you overestimate the power your letter will have. Public figures get letters like this all the time. They have a special folder for them. Then I think I've wasted my time. I think it's good for you and Malcolm. If you don't mind, I'll sleep on the couch tonight. I pulled the Afghan off the back of the couch and started to make the bed. Can I at least look at the letter? I walked over to the desk, pulled a piece of paper from the top drawer, and held it out to her. It was quite short, and it only took her a few seconds to read it. "No, Robert, you didn't send this. Please tell me you didn't." She sank down in her chair and burst into tears. The letter fell to the floor. "Dear Sonia, if Malcolm ever sees Natalie again or even contacts her, I will kill all 3 of your children. Your friend, Robert Sorensen." That's not something a sane person would write. Of course, I didn't mean a word of it, but I felt it was necessary for shock effect. I was sure that I would be detained as soon as the letter became known and subjected to the harshest treatment. But I didn't care if I ranted like a forced husband. The letter would be ignored. Threatening the lives of a U.S. senator's children would surely get attention. Natalie stood up and staggered toward the bedroom. "The mail won't be delivered until 9 o'clock tomorrow." I figured I could get one more night of sleep before things turned to crap. The next morning, I was up bright and early. Luckily, I had a razor in my car, which I used on the way to the nearest diner. I picked up a breakfast special and grabbed a pack of gum on the way. I would have preferred a toothbrush, but I'll make do with gum today. I tried to kill as much time as possible, but I knew I would have to get back to the house sooner or later. When I pulled up to the house, a black sedan and a state police car were parked in front of it. I never made it to the door. Natalie stood on the porch in her bathrobe as the FBI agents drove me away, escorted by police officers. For the next few days, I was either questioned or I went cold because of the letter. I missed most of the whole fuss. They never charged me with anything, but the term terrorist threat was used frequently. I felt a strange satisfaction during the whole process. People were constantly trying to intimidate me or scare me, and I found it amusing. There had been no word from Natalie since I was taken away. There was no mention of bail. I hadn't even seen a lawyer. I was never transferred to an actual jail or detention center. I was kept in a secure area of the federal building. I was kind of isolated, but I was not subjected to any violence or mistreatment. After a while, I got the feeling that people were trying to avoid me and avoiding any confrontation. Things were not going the way I expected because I thought I was going to be accused of something. Apparently, I didn't plan the situation well. At this point, all I could do was go with the flow. I never asked for a lawyer, nor was I offered one. I expected a visit from my wife, but it didn't come. Instead, Malcolm's wife, Sonia, visited me. They left us alone in a small room. There was no one holding me, and there was no security. I'm sure there were some sort of listening devices in the room, and there was the usual large one-way mirror hanging on the wall. "Hey, Robert." All I could bring myself to do was nod. I had done a terrible thing to this woman and had no idea how to make amends. "Can I get an explanation or something?" "I'm sorry, Sonia. The best thing I can do is apologize to you. What I did was stupid, but I was desperate. I never meant to hurt you or the kids. And I think you know that. It was the only way I could get attention. Was that important to you? I couldn't compete with Malcolm. And you know that he's powerful, rich, and very charismatic. I hated the fact that I lost Natalie to him, and that there was no way to repay him for the pain he caused me. Well, it sounds like you did a darn good job of that." All I could do was throw a perplexed look at her. Malcolm was called back to Indiana to hold a meeting of the State Democratic Committee to discuss this recent incident. "Robert, this isn't the first time he's screwed up, but it is the first time his people couldn't keep it quiet. People who support politicians have ways to keep things clean, but you thwarted them with your lightning. Is that good or bad? Right now, I consider Malcolm's political career to be over. That's fair enough, and so is my marriage." Sonia smiled weakly. "Robert, I need a favor. After what I did to you, you've decided to ask me for help. What can I do for you?" "I'm planning to divorce Malcolm, and I was wondering if you have any evidence of his affair with Natalie." "I'm sorry, I can't help you. All I know is that Malcolm rented an apartment in Reston, and the 2 of them had privacy there. I have no video, no photos, no audio recordings. For all I know, they may have played Scrabble together. Malcolm hates Scrabble. We both left amicably. For a few moments, everyone went silent. I felt awkward because I hadn't been able to shave or clean myself up in days. Sonia was perfect in every way. She looked better now than when we were in college. She had gone from a stubby teenager to a beautiful woman. Malcolm had it all: power, possession, family, and a beautiful wife. Why did that son of a jerk have to take mine? Sonia rose from her chair, signaling that our conversation was over. May I visit you again, Robert? Of course, I'd love to. She walked away, and I felt a little sad. I had threatened her children's lives in front of the whole world, and she never once raised her voice at me or showed that she was upset about anything. She seemed to know what I was trying to do and understood why I was doing it. 2 hours later, I was escorted out of the federal building and taken home. They unceremoniously dumped me in front of my house and drove away. No explanation, and nothing was said. The entire trip, the house was empty. All of Natalie's belongings were gone. I didn't know where her car was. I disconnected my phone and spent the next few days watching TV. I took a perverse pleasure in watching all the chaos I had caused. For some reason, the media seemed more interested in the affair than my threats. After 2 days of no outside contact, I finally called my parents to let them know everything was okay. On my first outing, I bought 2 6-packs of beer and 10 frozen TV dinners. I waited for the last photographers to leave. Hopefully my 15 minutes of fame were over. I thought about calling Natalie's parents or sisters in an attempt to locate her, but I couldn't think of a reason. I decided to wait and not make a fuss. I still had a small wad of money in my overseas bank account. I had no idea what to do with it. I had enough money in my local bank to last me a few more months, and then I would have to make some kind of lifestyle decision. What would I do for a living? The answer came from an unexpected source. Malcolm Hurd was no longer chosen by his party for re-election. He did not take this news too happily. The news media all downplayed his objections and tirades, but the Fox television network hyped things up to the max. The more he yelled and screamed, the more Fox teed him up. His big mistake was taking his anger out on his wife. Sonia put an end to his ramblings by plunging a kitchen knife into him. There was plenty of evidence to prove that she stabbed him in self-defense, including the nanny, who was an eyewitness. However, the complexity of the situation turned into turmoil for Sonia and a nightmare for her children. 2 days later, a small car came to pick me up and drove me to Bethesda. The receptionist at the law firm of Barnes, and Griffin said they needed to meet with me right away on an urgent matter. No other information they provided. But the invitation was so intriguing that I accepted. I didn't even have to enter the house through the front door. We parked in the back and entered through the fire exit. I'm sure the room I was led to wasn't one of those rooms reserved for elite clients. It seemed like it was organized pro bono, but that didn't make sense. Mr. Sorensen, my name is Wilfred Malik. I have been selected to make you a special offer. He was heavily overweight and sweating profusely. Even though it wasn't that warm, I estimated him to be about 50 years old. His thinning hair was slicked back, and his face glowed with a blush. What do you mean? You've been chosen? He threw me an amused look. I suppose he was puzzled that I questioned his words instead of inquiring about the offer he was about to make. Why are we in this little room, Mr. Malik? It seems to me like you're trying to hide me or something. You are very perceptive, Mr. Sorensen. We've been instructed to keep this visit a secret. Let's just say no one can know you're here. I take it you're a specialist in low-profile clients. I didn't get an answer. A folder lay in front of him. Nothing else. Do you know where Nihar is located? Yes, as a matter of fact I do. I've never been there. But from what I understand, not many people have been there. Sonia Hurd owns, or should I say, rents a small house on Neyo. That doesn't make sense. Anyhow, is a forbidden island. I thought no one lived there except a few natives and the owners. True. Let's just say some exceptions were made for Sonia Hurd. Good. I've got your attention. What does Sonia Hurd in the island of Near? How have to do with me? Things are not going well in court. It's convoluted and getting more convoluted. Malcolm's family is spending every dime they can to have Sonia crucified. She's worried about how all this will affect her children. And she wants to shelter them from it. And how does that affect me? Sonia is sending her children to anyhow, until this whole mess settles down. It's the only place she thinks they'll be free of all this. She wants you to go with them. You've got to be kidding me. I'm the one who threatened to kill them. I'm the last person on earth who should be trusted with these children. It doesn't make sense to us either. We don't know why she chose you. I hadn't expected this. It didn't make sense. Sure, I wouldn't do anything to hurt the kids for anything in the world, but I didn't even know them that well. I'd only seen them at random gatherings and never really bonded with them. What about Sonia's parents? Her father has Alzheimer's, and all her mother can do is take care of him. Besides, if the kids stayed with them, they'd still be exposed to the media. Why, anyhow? There's no electricity or running water there. Not even a school or grocery store. Exactly. I'm sorry, Mr. Malik, but I have absolutely no experience in childcare. You definitely picked the wrong guy. You won't actually be taking care of the children, per se. You'll have their nanny with you to look after them. What kind of things? She'll be cooking, cleaning, and running the household. Good. What will I do? Mr. Malik seemed a little puzzled by this question. I don't have a good answer to that question. Sonia said she wanted to see you there and refused to elaborate on the details. I'm not sure, but I think she'll want you to homeschool them so they don't have to go to school on one of the other islands. I also think she thinks it's important that they have a male influence. For some reason, she seems to think highly of you. What does that mean? What? You said that. He seems to have a high opinion of me for some reason. What did you mean by that? We were a little puzzled by her choice in the matter. All we know about you, Mr. Sorensen, is what we read in the paper and a little research into your background. We, meaning the company, still don't understand why it chose you. I in no way meant to offend you. Please don't take my words the wrong way. Can I get some coffee? Wilfred stood up and left the room. That gave me some time to think. Sonia must have been out of her mind, or else she was extremely intelligent. She was always a calm and collected person. I had to believe that she knew exactly what she was doing when she chose me. I didn't know why, but it didn't matter. Not yet. The coffee smelled better than it tasted. What's in it for me? Why did I agree to such a ridiculous thing? She was hoping you'd feel guilty about what you did. And she openly stated that she wanted to take advantage of that. Did she really say that? Yes. She also offered $2,000 a week to be automatically deposited into your Cayman account. Do you know about my Cayman account? We all know. In fact, not much is known about you. You're a very ordinary man, Mr. Sorensen. If I accept, when do I have to leave? A private plane leaves Dulles tomorrow at noon. Our people will help you prepare and take care of your home and personal affairs while you are away. I didn't know much about airplanes. All I knew for sure was that it was a jet. And it wasn't a 747. I assumed it was big enough to cross the Pacific to get to Hawaii, or they wouldn't have used it. My attendant loaded my stuff, and I stood around trying to look like I knew what I was doing, which, of course, was completely wrong. I tried to pack what I thought I would need. It would be nice to have some sort of guide. My biggest concern was the fact that there was no electricity on the island. I don't know how up-to-date the information I gleaned from the computer was, but it wasn't encouraging. I took my cell phone and charger with me just in case. I also took my laptop with me. I had no idea how to charge batteries or use electronic equipment without electricity. I berated myself for not learning more about solar power. I wondered about satellite communications. By the time I was completely confused, a limo pulled up with the main passengers. They were 2 boys and a girl. The oldest, Brian, looked to be about 16 years old. The girl, Glenna, was at least a year older, and last of all was Chaz, who was no more than 12 years old. I introduced myself and was surprised that they all seemed pleasant and well-mannered. As a rule, I don't like children. Everything was fine until it came to the babysitter. I couldn't tell for sure, but she seemed to be from some part of Central America. Maya was barely 5 feet tall. I assumed she was under 30, but she looked older. I was a very poor judge of women. She walked past me like I had leprosy. Her intense gaze followed me all the way. It was clear that I would not have been her choice for this trip. I still couldn't understand what made Sonia think I was her best option. Maya handled the kids like a drill instructor. They listened to her and did what she said, not out of fear or obedience, but because they seemed to want to. I was impressed. After the novelty of the takeoff wore off, I spent time building rapport with each of the kids. It would have been easier for me if I knew what they liked and disliked. I quickly discovered that they knew all about the threat I had created and why I had created it. However, they didn't seem to be afraid of me. There was no doubt that Maya knew this, because she never took her eyes off me. Brian was interested in computers and everything related to them. He was disappointed when he found out that there was no electricity anyhow. His eyes lit up a little when I told him I had sneaked my laptop on board, and he seemed to respond when I asked him if he knew anything about solar power or satellite communications. Brian and I were going to get along great. Glenna was looking forward to swimming and learning to surf. Her biggest concern was that there wouldn't be a beach nearby, and if there was, it would be too rough for swimming. I promised to help her figure out how to get to the water, but I couldn't help her surf. We had a little laugh about it. She was hoping she would be able to go horseback riding. Chaz was upset because there were no snakes on the islands. He couldn't wait to collect all the critters he could. After he said that, I told him I was relieved that St. Patrick had chased away all the snakes. He was more than happy to correct me. I knew I wouldn't get a chance to talk to Maya. She made it clear by her facial expression and gestures that she wanted nothing to do with me. I realized that she disapproved of my interaction with the children. I involuntarily glared at her as she slept. We stopped in Seattle and had dinner at the airport while the plane refueled. I was surprised to find that Maya spoke perfect English without the slightest accent. She didn't speak to me, but I noticed when she was with the kids. As the flight progressed, she became more and more interesting. The kids slept all the way from Seattle to the islands. Part of the time, Maya slept. When she was awake, she watched me. It was obvious that she knew about the letter and was more worried about it than the kids. The next leg of our trip was a seaplane ride, which the kids thought was very cool, but it was even cooler than flying in a helicopter directly to anyhow. A small group of people were ready to meet us, and I tried my best to stay in the background. It was obvious they were trying not to draw attention to themselves. 2 hours later, a jeep-like jitney drove us to our new home. It was a typical island bungalow, with a few improvements. As the children and Mira hurried to enter the new abode, I walked around the entire building. It had a tin or metal roof with large enclosed gutters to collect rainwater. I had made inquiries beforehand, and all my information indicated that it was a relatively dry island. I was sure that no one would go to the trouble of installing such a system unless it was cost-effective. The collected water went into 3 rather large fiberglass tanks, mounted high up under the roof on the west side of the building. The entire south side of the roof was covered with solar panels. There seemed to be 3 different types of panels, but they all had the same angle. I was interested to see exactly how solar energy was utilized. Charles was fascinated by the small flock of chickens huddled around the small raised chicken coop in the backyard. There might not be any bacon, but there seemed to be plenty of eggs. I was still trying to remain inconspicuous. The guy who gave us a ride was just finishing explaining things to Maya when I entered the house. He would deliver groceries and other goods to us every Tuesday morning. He gave Maya some forms that she could use for the next week's orders. I decided not to get involved. Maya was a professional, and I was just riding along for the ride. I still didn't understand why I was here. Outside was a propane tank that was checked and filled monthly. In addition to the stove, there was an antique propane-powered refrigerator. I hadn't seen one of those since I was a kid. It looked like there were plenty of fresh fruits and vegetables. Brian announced that he had taken a small bedroom on the south side of the house. It had a door leading to a solar panel storage room. I was concerned at first, but then I noticed that the room was fully ventilated. In addition to the batteries, there were a bunch of wires and switches. I was intimidated, but Brian was fascinated. He couldn't wait to get his hands dirty. I ended up sharing a room with Chaz. He thought it was cool. Maya wasn't thrilled about it, but I had nowhere else to sleep. She didn't offer to share, of course, and I didn't expect her to. For dinner, Maya had prepared a small buffet of fresh fruit. She didn't seem to be in the mood to cook a meal, and I could see why. 10 minutes after we finished eating, Chaz was already sound asleep on the couch, and everyone else was ready for bed. About half an hour later, I heard a thin scream. Maya was the first to try out the unheated shower. I was relieved to find out that this was what it was all about. It also made me laugh a little. By the time I got up, Maya had already put breakfast on the table. Of course, it was fruit and eggs with fresh juice. Chaz was strutting around with a wide grin on his face because he was the one who had picked the eggs. Maya had no trouble assigning him that task every morning. I found that I didn't like shaving with cold water. And I wasn't crazy about the cool shower either. It wasn't that the water was cold. It just wasn't warm. I also realized that I was going to need new clothes if I was going to stay here for long. After finishing my morning grooming ritual, I found myself alone in the house. I stood on the porch and looked out at the valley, spread out before me. The ocean was closer than I had realized at the bottom of the hill. I could see Maya with Glenna and Chaz. Brian wasn't with them. I watched them get off the road and walk over rocks and sand toward the water. Chaz was wandering all over the place. Glenna walked right into the surf and just stood there without moving. They were almost a mile away, so I couldn't see anything but their basic movements. Maya crouched on one of the rock ledges and watched them. I turned my attention back to the house when I heard some sounds from behind me. I noticed Brian sitting in the middle of the battery room holding a clipboard. He was so focused that I couldn't believe he hadn't heard me enter the room. A quick glance revealed that he was making a schematic drawing of all the wiring and equipment in the house. I was somewhat relieved that he had found something to occupy himself so quickly. "Mr. Sorensen, what type of cellular service do you have?" I guess I wasn't as quiet as I thought I was. "It's Verizon. I brought it with me because I was hoping we could get a signal from the satellite." "Does it support the internet?" "Internet, email, GPS, and texting." "I don't use most of those things, but the phone can do just about everything. Do you mind if I use it for a while? I was only going to use it for emergencies because we don't have a way to recharge it." Brian smiled broadly. "No problem. Looks like we'll be able to recharge anything by the end of the day. Do you need the laptop too?" "Not until tomorrow. At the earliest. I'll be able to connect the laptop to the internet via cell phone. I assume you have an unlimited data plan." I went to get the laptop and cell phone when I returned. Brian had already moved into his room where he had a desk set up along the wall that connected to the battery room. I didn't know where he got a desk like that. He placed both items on the back of the desk and continued working on his drawings. "I need to order a bunch of stuff so we can get everything set up. I have my own PayPal account, so don't worry about that. The mail won't arrive until next Tuesday, but I have a lot to do until then." I had no response or comment. He seemed to know exactly what he was doing, and there was nothing I could do to help him. As I was about to leave, he said, "By the way, that third section of solar panels isn't for energy harvesting, it's for a solar hot water system. It should be ready as soon as I can get a DC pump with enough lift. Would you like to work on it?" Sneaky little sod. He had taken control of the situation and was already delegating authority. I just smiled and nodded, leaving him to his work. I needed something to do, and getting the hot water system working seemed interesting. Maya, Glenna, and Chad were still at the water. The walk had only taken 10 minutes, maybe a little more. Chaz found some tide pools and busied himself checking them for living creatures. Glenna had gone farther down the beach, but was still within sight. I took a seat next to Maya, and was rewarded with a look that indicated my presence was not appreciated. I wanted to try to strike up some sort of conversation with her, but then decided against it. It wasn't something that could be forced. Maya seemed to hate me, and had no trouble letting me know it. We sat in silence until Glenna returned, and then we all dispersed to the bungalow. Chaz could have stayed all day, but he reacted immediately when Maya called him over. Chaz chattered all the way home. Maya didn't say anything. Glenna had only one comment. "I need to find a surfboard somewhere." Things seemed to have normalized since then. Chaz would get up early every day and head off to parts unknown. At first, he spent most of his time at the tide pools as he became familiar with the neighborhood. He became more and more adventurous. He got lost in the jungle around the house. There were no poisonous snakes or other dangerous animals on the islands. I wasn't worried about his health at all. Surprisingly, Maya didn't seem to be worried either. Maya still wasn't getting any friendlier, but at least she was socializing now. Something had to be done, and to do it, she had to talk to me. I accepted the situation and didn't insist. Her skin seemed to glisten in the sunlight. Brian lived in a world of his own. I stayed as far away from him as I could. I didn't have the heart to offer him anything. His desk resembled a rat's nest of wires and homemade boxes. The cell phone was no longer a portable device. It was permanently connected to the solar power grid, and to it was a laptop computer. We had a telephone connection to anywhere in the world. It was also possible to connect to the internet through the phone. Glenn managed to get Brian to make the call for her, and the very next morning she had her own surfboard. Now she spent her days at the beach trying to learn how to surf. In the evenings, Brian would show her videos he found on the internet during the day. The downside to this was for Maya. She refused to let Glenn go to the water alone. After 3 days, Maya finally felt the need to have a conversation with me other than a functional one. "Mr. Sorensen, this is hard for me to say, but I need your help." She caught my attention, and I sat down waiting for the second shoe to drop. I swear, she was getting prettier every day. I have laundry, cooking, and other chores to do. I can't keep sitting with Glenna on the beach all day, but I don't have to leave her alone. You want me to start doing chores? That elicited a disappointed smirk from me. No. I need you to watch Glenna while I do what needs to be done around the house. I'm not thrilled about leaving you alone with them, but it can't be helped. What is your problem with me? Is there anything I can explain that will help you take this whole situation better? I've read the letter, Mr. Sorensen. The last thing I want to do is leave you with them. Mrs. Hurd seems to think you're not a threat. She told me to trust you. I don't know why she said that, but I don't know you. I have a job to do. I'm forced to do it even though I don't want to. She was right. I tried my best to look sincere. Maya, I would never do anything to hurt the children. When I wrote that letter, I was in pain. I know it was a terrible thing to do, but I was desperate. I was bitter because my marriage had just broken up. Sonia asked me to come here for a reason. It must have something to do with the children. I'll find out. In the meantime, I'm willing to do what I can to help you and try to earn your trust. Good. You'll start tomorrow, right after the delivery. What delivery? We have a truck coming in with the mail. Food, supplies, and things Brian ordered. Next week, we'll get a big shipment of clothes and personal items. We couldn't take on the plane. Some of it will be from your apartment. How do you know all this? I talk to the island supervisor every day as well. Mr. Malik. Brian, set it up so I can keep an eye on what's going on. Things will be better next week in case there's anything you need or want to check on. I had nothing to say. She was smart, competent, and well organized. The warm climate and humidity made her bronze skin glow, contrasting with her long black hair. Lately, she had been dressing more casually, which showed off her full figure. I was still surprised by her impeccable diction. I need to make dinner. She turned to leave. I decided our conversation was over. By the way, I expect hot water in that shower by next week. We both smiled. That was a first. I felt better about our relationship. Tuesday morning was like Christmas. Instead of an SUV, we were visited by a small Isuzu truck. There were a few boxes for me, but most of the stuff was for the kids. Maya got some of the usual fruits and vegetables and didn't look very happy. She had a list ready for the next week with the basic food items and foods she wanted to get. Brian received the most things. The packages were from several sources and came in different sizes and shapes. He was grinning from ear to ear as he carried the treasures into his room. I was dying to see what he was up to. The mail was on the refrigerator. We could look at it later. No sooner had our delivery man left than Glenna pulled him aside and whispered something to him. Maya didn't notice. Our island, Santa Claus smiled and waved to Glenna as he left. I was ready for our daily trip to the beach when Glenna told me she wasn't going. She wanted to take inventory of her new things and get her room set up. I was fine with that until Brian showed up and handed me a package. "This is for you, Mr. Sorensen." I should have gotten all these people to call me by my first name. I was now the proud owner of a DC water pump. All the wiring and PVC water pipes you'll need are in the battery room. As he walked away, I felt like a high school student preparing to do a science project. As I passed Maya, heading toward the back of the house. I couldn't help but grin when I get this installed. I'm going to need your help to test it. Maya threw me a shocked look, smiled, and then tapped me on the shoulder as I walked by. Things were starting to get better. I won't bore you with all the complexities of installing a water pump on a solar collector. I'll just say that there was a lot of swearing on my part and a few from Brian's room. I was so engrossed in what I was doing that I missed lunch. All the pump did was supply water to the top of the solar panels and run it down to the shower. It didn't make the water scalding hot, but it made it a little nicer. Chaz was happy to take advantage of this first at night or on a cloudy, rainy day. It would have been useless, but I was glad it worked at all. I started thinking of other projects I could do. I was on the roof, checking all the plumbing fittings, when I realized someone was using the shower. This made it much easier for me to check for leaks. When I went back downstairs, Maya was coming out of the shower, wrapped in a towel. She threw me a confused look and disappeared into her room. It was all worth the time spent if she was happy. Over the next few days, things improved. Out of nowhere, a local boy of about 17 appeared. Apparently, Glenna had asked the delivery guy if he knew anyone who could teach her how to surf. The guy's name was Teddy, and he lived about 3 miles from the beach. They seemed to hit it off right away. I didn't really like playing the role of chaperone, but in this case, I realized it was necessary. I had to admit that she looked pretty good in her bathing suit. I was no longer watching Glenna to make sure she didn't hurt herself. I was now responsible for her virtue. In the evening, I told Maya about this new development, and she was not pleased. Brian had no trouble handling his duties, and I must admit that I envied his skills and knowledge in just a few days. We had a complete computer system installed, including a printer and a phone system with internet access. I would have loved to have my cell phone back, but the boy genius still needed it to connect to the internet. He assured me he was working on it. Chaz lost interest in the tide pools and began spending almost all of his time in the undergrowth. Somehow, neither Maya nor I worried about him. The big was Glenna, not because she was doing anything wrong, but simply because she was a beautiful young girl with a great body, spending every day with a surfer boy from the island. I don't want to sound stereotypical, but that's the best way to describe it. There was nothing about Teddy that you could dislike other than the fact that he was probably a horny teenager. Glenna shouldn't have flirted and encouraged Teddy to do so, but she was a teenage girl with raging hormones. Maya and I now entered into conversation on a regular basis. Usually it was about the kids or the house. She seemed to be starting to accept me a little better, but she was still cautious. She didn't like my interpretation of the relationship between Glenna and Teddy. She accused me of not following them closely enough. She was right. A rather large package arrived with a bunch of homeschooling supplies. Chaz wasn't thrilled with the idea, but Brian and Glenna were interested. Glenna was going away to college before the end of the year, and Brian was anxious to get into wherever he wanted to go. Apparently, their mothers had a lot on their minds regarding their higher education. I figured it was best to stay out of it. However, Maya asked me to help by setting up some sort of official study and testing schedule. I got my cell phone when Brian figured out how to combine all their electronic gadgets and connect them to the internet. He got a DC-powered satellite internet receiver from somewhere. He had an electronic panel set up in his room that would work and charge any DC-powered electrical device. The first thing I did was call my parents. Everything was fine at home, but they hadn't seen or heard from Natalie. I called Wilford Malik because I didn't know who else could give me any information. The bad news from Malik was that he couldn't evict me from the apartment because Natalie had moved back in. That wasn't good. Glenna decided to study early in the day and surf in the afternoon. She and Teddy seemed to enjoy wandering behind the rock ledges to tease me. I usually ignored it, but one day I wanted to check it out to see what was next. Getting my cell phone back, I was able to get a few shots of Teddy and Glenna kissing, and then some more. Glenna was still in her bikini, but that didn't stop Teddy from exploring her. My quiet cough interrupted fun and allowed me to go home with an embarrassed girl. After seeing the pictures, Maya was convinced that my suspicions about Glenna were correct. A short while later, I saw them chatting on the back lanai. I was glad Maya was here because this was a conversation I didn't want to have. When Maya finished talking to Glenna, she told me off in a way that I remembered for a long time. She wasn't happy that I had followed Glenna so poorly. Anyway, Brian completed all of his schoolwork and tests and contacted the admissions offices of several schools he was interested in. I was impressed with his efforts. Charles was starting to freak out too. After afternoon field trips, wherever he went, he would sit in room and make all sorts of notes and drawings. Brian had bought him a small digital camera and showed him how to load the pictures into a new desktop computer that had come out of nowhere. Every room in the house had plugs for DC appliances. The new computer Charles was using also had a small scanner. He was turning into a geek like his brother, only not in the electronics field, but in the biology field. I got my laptop computer at the same time as the advent of DC-powered HD TVs. Things looked pretty good, but still occasionally wished I had a microwave oven. For the next few weeks, things were pretty normal. The high point for me was when Maya admitted that she didn't believe I had any intention of harming the children. She didn't elaborate, and I didn't insist. Glenna celebrated her 18th birthday. Then the situation began to change rapidly. One Maya told me that I shouldn't go to the beach with Glenna anymore. I don't understand, Maya. You were very concerned about her safety, and then her close relationship with Teddy. What's changed? I trust Teddy a lot. I think he knows the water and the action of the waves. I believe he can keep Glenna safe. I don't think she'll hurt herself with him around. Come on, Maya. You know what's going on between them. There's no way you can leave them alone on a deserted beach. You know what's going to happen. Maya set aside the laundry. She was folding and looked at me. It's too late, Robert. It was the first time she'd ever called me by my first name. What does that mean? It means you didn't do a good job as chaperone. She sighed, as if she'd failed at something. They were already doing it. We can't stop it now. I know, because I was once young myself. What we can do is let them work it out amongst themselves and stop upsetting themselves. What if she gets pregnant? What the heck are you going to tell Sonia? I made Glennon start taking birth control pills a few weeks ago. I also talked to Mrs. Hurd about it. She understood and said she thought it was normal and healthy. How did you get her a prescription for the pills? Why didn't you tell me you'd been in touch with their mother? Maya picked up the folded laundry and left the room. I don't want to talk about this anymore. We need to secure some roof panels. Try to get it done before dinner. And whatever you do, don't fall off the darn roof. I was let go. I could safely say that Maya had given me all the information I was going to get. I was starting to get comfortable with the whole situation. And now, I felt like an outsider again. I spent the entire afternoon on the roof, thinking and lamenting my inability to manage my own affairs. During the evening meal, I was quiet and sullen. Glennon seemed happier than usual, and for good reason. Brian and Chaz were the same as usual. Maya noticed my displeasure with the whole situation and let me know by sticking her tongue out when the kids weren't looking at me. She smiled slightly afterward. I spent the rest of the evening confused, since I no longer had to babysit Glenna in the evenings. I had a lot of time to spend on chores if I needed any parts or tools. I wrote them down on a list that Maya kept on the refrigerator. I never realized what my function was. The kids did their own schoolwork. Maya did the housework. All I had to do was hang around idly and play Mr. Fix-It. After one of the evening dinners, Chaz made a remark that interested me. He looked at Brian and simply said, I miss Sari. She could cook so much better than Maya. We talked about cooking some more, but I was just wondering who the heck Siri was and why she wasn't with us. I hid the comment about Sarah in my cluttered mind. It wasn't important enough to dwell on, but something I wanted to remember. I suppose I could have just asked one of the kids about Sarah, but I felt awkward doing that out of the blue. Brian got an acceptance letter to MIT. He was to start classes in 4 weeks. Everything seemed to have been organized and arranged without my knowledge. I guess I didn't need to know. I insisted that before he left, he prepare a manual explaining everything about the electrical system in the house in a way that I could understand. He decided it was a good task and got right to work. He also prepared Glenna for her final exams and helped her submit some college applications. Now, I was completely confused if Sonia was going to let the kids leave the safety of the island to go to college. Why were we even sent here? And what were the kids being protected from? I was the idiot who threatened to kill them, and I was ignored. I assumed they were here to protect them from the unpleasant news of their father's death and their mother's persecution. But with our television and internet, that wasn't the case. My presence seemed superficial. Maya laughed when she saw that I had added a six-pack of beer to the list of supplies. Things got a little more complicated on the night of the monsoon. I think it was just a severe thunderstorm, but we all like to call it a monsoon. It rained all day, and Chaz never came back for dinner. Maya and I left Glenna and Brian at the house and went in search of them. The incessant rain had turned everything around us into mud. I happened to know that his favorite spot was in a deep ravine south of the house. That's where we found him. He was fine. Just stuck on the sides of the ravine were steep. Under normal circumstances, Chaz could climb up and down without a problem. But the rain had changed the situation. What had once been a foothold was now just slippery mud. Maya immediately flopped down on the side of the trail. By this time, she was soaking wet from the rain. I couldn't help but notice that she had no bra under her t-shirt. I was intrigued by the large brown nipples peeking through the thin, wet cotton. While I was distracted, I suddenly felt both my legs fly into the air, and I landed next to the wet and dirty Guatemalan beauty. Chaz was laughing heartily. He, too, was covered in sticky mud, but it didn't seem to bother him too much. It took us about 10 minutes to get him out of the hole. Maya scolded him a bit, but nothing that he didn't deserve. I was just glad we found him safe, and that Maya wasn't wearing a bra. Did I mention that already? The rain helped wash away some of the mud before we got back to the house. But not all of it. Maya made us leave our shoes outside and then pushed Chaz into the shower. He handed her his dirty clothes, and she, in turn, gave him a towel to wrap himself in. Glenna took him to his room. I don't know why, but I decided to join Maya in the shower. I got out first, wrapping the towel around me when I passed Glenna and Brian in the living room. They were both giggling. I couldn't tell if that was good or bad. All I know is that it felt good at the moment. When I got to the room, Chaz was already sound asleep. It must have been a big day for him. I decided to lie down for a minute and didn't wake up until the next morning. I expected to see a cheerful and happy housekeeper. The next morning, but all I got was a grumpy one. I was confused, but couldn't solve the problem with the kids around. After a while, Glenna, Brian, and Chaz went their separate ways, and Maya and I were left alone. Maya, I'm confused. You seem a little out of it. Did I do something wrong? If so, I'm really sorry. I had no intention of making you do anything you didn't want to do. She put down the plate she was drawing. No, you didn't do anything wrong. I'm sorry you feel that way. It won't happen again. She slammed the flat side of her palm on the countertop. Heck no. This isn't about that. This isn't about you or what you did. I don't understand. Maya brought 2 cups of fresh coffee and sat down at the table with me. Remember the conversation I had with Glenna about 2 weeks ago? The day you caught her making out with Terry? Yes. I thought you did a good job. What went wrong? I gave Glenn on my birth control pills. I didn't use them. Or let's just say, I didn't have a need for them. I figured she would need them more than I did. At the time, I didn't plan or expect anything to happen between us. I took a big sip of my coffee, even though it was too hot. Are you saying there's a possibility that she interrupted me before I could finish? Don't even talk or think about it. I won't know anything for weeks. She noticed. I looked a little depressed, at least until I can get more pills. A small smile appeared on her face as she turned back to the sink. For some strange reason, I hoped she was expecting a baby. I barely knew the woman, but the thought that I could be the father of her child excited me. I couldn't explain it. Chaz and I spent most of the afternoon putting a new roof on the chicken shed. It was still too muddy for him to walk to his shelter. I was in a good mood all day. We watched the news on TV, but not regularly, so we were shocked as heck. The next week, when Sonia Hurd showed up at the house, I felt like an outsider again. So I stayed in the background and let her spend time with her kids. Maya took me aside and briefly recounted what had happened. It seems the prosecutor quietly dropped all charges against Sonia, and she was released without too much fuss. She immediately came to see her children and hide from the press. Apparently she did it well, because when we did get the news, everyone was speculating about her whereabouts. Turns out there was a lot of evidence collected right after the murder. None of it was compromised or planted, and none of it directly incriminated Sonia. The prosecutor tried everything he could to tie anything to her, but he couldn't. Sonia's lawyer had been silent the whole time. They didn't protest or demand that the case be dropped. They just waited for the case to fall apart on its own. Sonia had spent all this time in jail, even though she probably could have been released much sooner. My only thought was, what does all this have to do with me and why I'm here? The Jeep that Sonia had driven to the house was still parked there while Maya and I sat on the porch. The kids started packing up the house. Finally, Sonia came over. I really want to thank you guys for helping me. I couldn't have done it without your help. She was overly gracious. Maya didn't waste any time in returning the, "Thanks, Mrs. Hurd Soraya. I can never thank you enough for all your help. You have no need to thank me. We will always be in your debt." I just sat there like a dummy. None of this was settling in my mind. There's that name again, Sarai. Who the heck is Sarai? And what the heck does she have to do with all this? Did you like it, Robert? She caught me off guard. I regained my composure and simply replied, "Yeah, I guess so. You're not sure?" "Sonia, I still haven't figured out why I'm here, and I haven't figured out what I'm supposed to do. Since you're here, maybe I can get an explanation. About that time." The 3 kids came out of the house and threw their bags into the Jeep. "Maya, we're going to the Big Island for about a week. I'm going to leave you here with Robert to rest. When we get back, we can discuss what happens next, and I'll give Robert an explanation." Sonia turned and got into the Jeep with the children. They waved to each other and drove off after a minute. I looked at Maya, and a small cat-like smile appeared on her face. I was confused, and she smirked. "Want to come in and mess around?" I couldn't believe it, but I heard it. "Did you get your new pills?" "No, silly. I'm pregnant. No point in worrying about the pill now. We most of the day in bed. I was glad I decided to take this trip. The evening dinner was quiet with no kids around. In fact, it was quiet. Just the 2 of us. After a full day of intimacy, we still seemed distant from each other. There were still a lot of unanswered questions. I was here with the woman I wanted to stay with and have a child with, and I knew very little about her. It was hard to explain. "Maya, who is Sarai? My sister." She answered the question, but not explaining further, only made it harder. "How does she fit into this whole picture besides being your sister? What did she have to do with the family?" Maya got up from the table and brought me a bottle of my precious beer. Sarah and I both worked for Mrs. Hurd. She did the cooking, and I did the kids and chores. Where is she now? Maya went and got a beer for herself. "Robert, I'm not trying to be difficult. I want to tell you everything, but it's a little complicated." I gave her an upset look. This wasn't part of my plans. Now I was embarrassed, but also hurt that she was keeping something from me. She sipped from the glass of her beer. "Robert, how are things going with your marriage? I'm actually trying to find out if you're still going to be married when this is all over. I thought she was going to file for divorce when she left, but she didn't, and I don't know why. I also don't know how things are now. If she doesn't file soon, I will. It's hard to do or know anything from here." The beer tasted pleasant. It could have been a little colder, but as it was fine. "Why do you speak perfect English? With no accent if you're from Guatemala?" "I've lived in the States since I was 3 years old. Soraya and I learned English from Sesame Street. We struck up a good conversation. I hope to keep it going, but I have a habit of usually saying the wrong thing. Why didn't you kill Mr. Hurd?" "Robert, can I have another beer?" I held out my empty mug to her. "Maya, I felt hurt and humiliated, then avenged. I was angry, but not angry enough to kill." She handed me a new bottle. "This is the last one. Enjoy." "Robert, are you excited that I'm having a baby, or are you upset?" "I'm excited about the baby, but I'm worried about what will happen between us." That's a good answer. There was a brief lull. I'm sure she had more questions. I know I did too. It was time to put my foot in my mouth. "Maya, what did Sarai do? And why isn't she with us?" Before I knew it, I was alone in the kitchen. Maya jumped out of the room and ran out of the house. I finished cleaning up dinner and walked out onto the porch. She was sitting on the top step and watching the sunset. It was beautiful, but there were tears in her eyes. I sat down next to her and said nothing. At least 10 minutes passed as the last rays of daylight disappeared over the horizon. It was a peaceful 10 minutes. She looked up at me and took my hand. "Robert, Mrs. Hurd didn't kill her husband. Sarai did. He was beating Miss and wouldn't stop. Sarai grabbed a knife and stabbed him. Mrs. Hurd told the police it was her fault, so Sarai had time to get away. I believe she went back to Guatemala, but I'm not sure. Mrs. Hurd never said she actually killed him, only that it was her fault, so the police still had to prove it. I pulled Maya against me and kissed the back of her neck. It wasn't a passionate kiss, just something to comfort her. We stood on the porch for a few more minutes without saying anything, and then we headed to bed. We tried to spend the next day as normal as possible, but it wasn't possible without the kids. I got a letter from Malik. It said, "Check the Drudge report." I wasn't sure what I was looking for, but I eventually found it. Assistant Secretary of Agriculture William from Earth was found shot to death this morning in Warrenton, Virginia. Police found his body in a hot tub, along with the body of Natalie Sorensen, a public relations analyst with a consulting firm in Alexandria. Both victims had been shot multiple times at close range. The shooting was reported by Mildred from U.S., the wife of the victim who was waiting for the police when they arrived. Mrs. Falmouth was taken into custody pending charges. Natalie Sorensen was also connected to Malcolm Hurd, who was murdered earlier this year. I printed out the news article and gave it to Maya to read, but didn't linger to see her reaction. Apparently, Natalie is partial to politicians. I wish she would be a little more circumspect. I called my parents. They informed me that Natalie's relatives had already left to pick up her body and were bringing it home. I felt sorry for them. They were good people and didn't deserve their daughter to die like that. I had once loved Natalie and couldn't help but feel saddened by her death. Sonia already knew of Natalie's death when they returned to me. How she took the time to sit down and talk to me. It took her an hour to explain the circumstances of Malcolm's death, but I still didn't understand why she sent me here. I think I asked her that question twice directly, and each time she avoided answering. I realized she wasn't going to give me an answer, so I stopped trying. They were all going back to the States. Brian was going to go to MIT, and Glenna had gotten early approval to go to the University of Hawaii. She convinced her mom that it was important for her to be somewhere where she could surf. The big problem for Sonia was Charles. He didn't want to leave anyhow. He didn't want to leave home. He was only 12, so he had no choice. But his mother was willing to compromise. But there was a catch. Maya and I had to agree to stay at anyhow until Charles was ready for college. Chaz would spend the summer and any long vacations with us, but the rest of the year he had to live with his mother. I didn't know what Maya's salary was, but mine was going to be cut from $2,000 a week to $1,000 a month. It was a heck of a lot less. But I was still getting money and had free housing for doing nothing. Things got even better because the money I had stashed away in the Caymans was now available. That night, Sonia made dinner for everyone, and Maya and I went to the beach. We needed a quiet place to talk. This was a serious decision that required serious thought. It took us at least 5 minutes to decide. After a week, we were alone. We missed the kids, but they promised to keep in touch. One day, Teddy stopped by to see us. He looked a little depressed until I told him that Glenna would be starting at the University of Hawaii next month. We didn't see him again, but he left happy. When I sold my business, there was no non-compete clause in my contract. As long as I didn't contact any of my former clients, I could continue in business as before. Brian left me a small computer, and within a week, my new business was up and running. A month later, Malik called to tell me that Natalie had taken out a $500,000 insurance policy and that I was the sole beneficiary.